I am the stone that the builder refused.
When it comes to characters, there's too many things to itemize that could bring you to love them. Perhaps their design and voice is so unique and memorable that they stick in your head forever. Maybe the story they occupy is about their personal arc, and as you watch them grow, you feel as though you've grown along with them. Or it could be that there's something about the character that just resonates with you so deeply that it almost feels like the story was written about you. But when it comes to one character, none of these things apply. His design is butt ugly, and his voice is grody and unpleasant. His character is 110% stagnant, never growing and remaining a regressive Luddite from start to finish. And if there's a single thing about him that you find relatable aside from he is human, please check yourself into a psych ward before you hurt anybody else. People, today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the good Reverend Uncle Ruckus. Uncle Ruckus is a racist, old, bald, racist, fat, ugly, loud, racist, annoying racist living in a shack near a suburb of Baltimore called Woodcrest. He works a myriad of jobs to make ends meet and, despite being the darkest member of the regular cast, is not only convinced that he's actually white, is very, what's the word I'm looking for, prejudiced, bigoted, hateful? Convinced of his ethnic heritage and somehow deeply knowledgeable on every single piece of pro-white anti-POC propaganda from every culture and every point of history ever.
So don't waste your cat-flavored breath. Get on your rickshaw, get out of here.
Uncle Ruckus takes any and all opportunities afforded to him to divulge his hate perpetually. Despite being an oafish, vitriolic old man, Ruckus is probably the single most popular and endearing character from one of the most beloved and celebrated pieces of comedy from those halcyon days of the Bush administration. The more I think about the show, the more I realize that Uncle Ruckus really is one of those characters that I really think people will look back on in 20, 30, 50 years and be like, dang, that's something you could draw inspiration from, you know? So let's start at a conceptual level. You want to make a character to poke fun at bigots. How do you do that? Well, let's start with that name, Uncle Ruckus. Uncle Ruckus, along with Tom Dubois, is obviously playing off the stock character / derogatory term, Uncle Tom.
This is Uncle Ruckus. He's an Uncle Tom, perhaps the biggest Uncle Tom to have ever lived.
The Uncle Tom dates its origins back to an 1852 novel by the name Uncle Tom's Cabin. Ironically, the original Uncle Tom is absolutely not an Uncle Tom. Uncle Tom's Cabin tells the story of the eponymous slave, a principled yet conflicted man trying to do right by the world despite the repugnant situation he was born into. He is absolutely the furthest thing from an Uncle Tom one could possibly write. The story actually ends with spoilers? Uncle Tom refusing to give up his fellow slaves on the run and
I am gonna take every drop of blood you got. I ask you, do you hear me?
You can hurt me no more.
paying the ultimate price for it. The term came into existence when minstrel shows, the most racist thing ever conceived, would adapt the story and basically turn Uncle Tom into a servile, bootlicking clown. Henceforth, Uncle Tom came to be a term for a servile, bootlicking clown. Ironic and kind of awful, but yeah, that's how it be sometimes. But obviously, Uncle Ruckus isn't this trope played straight. Far, far from it. Uncle Ruckus is, in my mind, an almost purely satirical character in an extremely satirical show. The Boondocks satirized nearly everything about American culture in its 3-season run. What did I for 3-season run? Uncle Ruckus is the embodiment of America's proud and absurdly everlasting history of sanctioned bigotry. From the throes of chattel slavery to the systemic prejudices of modern institutions.
Gun! Excellent use of baton.
If there's a flavor of racism you want, Uncle Ruckus has it, and more. Now, this brings up the question of, what is satire genuinely like for real, though? And that's a tricky question, because it's one of those words you've seen thrown around with such reckless abandon that you've basically forgotten what it could possibly ever mean. It's also one of those words people feel like they understand, but if you ask them to explain it with words, they won't actually be able to articulate it, which, by the way, that means you don't understand it. Anyway, answering the question will be easier if I simply answer it directly. What is satire? This is satire. And by this, I mean this is a modest proposal for preventing the children of poor people from being a burden to their parents or country and for making them beneficial to the public. People just call it A Modest Proposal by Jonathan Swift. Written in 1729, it is probably one of the single greatest pieces of satire ever written, and it is an exemplary piece for demonstrating what satire is. If you aren't familiar, the first few paragraphs of Modest Proposal go into great detail describing the kind of hardships a peasant in 18th century Ireland had to deal with. The solution, argued in the rest of the text, is that poor people should just sell their babies to rich people as food. Easy fix. Poors will get money, richies get a tasty snack, everybody wins, basically. Now, obviously, this is completely ridiculous, and that's the point. It shows the perspective of someone to whom the fact that some people live in luxury and some people live in squalor as the world's natural and normal state. By showing society through the eyes of this hypothetical person, it allows the reader to gain a greater understanding by simply letting them see something so patently wrong.
I'm telling you, slavery was the best thing that ever could happen to Negro kind.
Satire is, in essence, a lie portrayed as absolute truth with no sense of self-awareness. When someone looks at something totally ridiculous and says, "This feels like satire," this is what they mean. However, one joke, or even one kind of joke, does not a character make. Not a good one anyway. It's not just that aspect of Ruckus that makes him memorable and special, it's a myriad of things. Remember that the ultimate message of the Boondocks is that ignorance is race, class, gender, and ideologically neutral. Uncle Ruckus is, in essence, pure ignorance given form. He is ignorant of his race. He is ignorant of the basic autonomy and rights of others. He is ignorant of the boot on his throat whom he calls his friend. However, while he is defined by his ignorance, he is not encompassed by it. Ignorance on its own isn't enough to carry a character. Unlike the stripped down and bastardized version of his namesake, Uncle Ruckus is not one to sit down on a porch and just watch the world go by. He is, almost always, a driving force in nearly every episode he's in. He's a very proactive character, which ironically makes him pretty easy to root for at times. This is obviously a lot better than the form prejudice more often than not takes in real life, where it's a malignant force. It's something which is simultaneously inert and exerts a force which will drag you down toward it. Ruckus will drag you down, but he won't do it sitting still. He will leap onto you and bear hug you straight to hell with him, because that's just the kind of person he is. He's always trying, he's always fighting. He will never rest on his laurels to put someone in their place, even if he's wrong, which he is, all the time. And that's what makes Ruckus weirdly lovable in his own special way. He's not really someone you can hate, because his own hatred doesn't come from on high, it comes from down low. Uncle Ruckus's entire existence from birth has been an unending torrent of pain and misery.
While you frolicking in the damn field, frolic your ass to the store and get me some beer.
He's done nothing but work his whole life and has basically nothing to show for it. He is fully committed to his backwards ideology, and unlike the people whom he idolizes, it hasn't benefited him in any way, shape, or form. Despite everything about him, he's still a salt of the earth, blue-collar, hard-working, plucky guy who never surrenders and never backs down.
I was happy at the back of the bus. Oh, my eyeball!
Never backs down within reason, of course. And in a way, that's its own kind of admirable. You hate him for his hatred, but you love him because it's so far removed from reality that it can't really hurt you anymore. I'm sure nearly all of us have experienced some kind of prejudice in our lives, but nobody has from someone like Ruckus, or at least I would really hope not. Someone so upfront and shameless, but so completely ignorant of his own situation. He lives in his own little gap that just it defangs him and makes him kind of adorable. That, I feel, is a good enough segue into talking about an obviously integral part of Uncle Ruckus, his comedy. Now, The Boondocks is an unspeakably funny show in too many ways to count. There are magnificent sight gags, magnificent cameos, magnificent everything. One of the things that you need to dodge when creating a character on the basis of a joke is making sure that one joke doesn't turn into literally one joke. Basically, they can't turn into a catchphrase of themselves, otherwise the joke has no legs and you can't really do anything with it. Like I said before, you gotta make sure that the joke in question is broad enough that it can be used in a lot of different ways, and that, while it may inform the character's other traits, it doesn't dominate them entirely. Uncle Ruckus's intense racism is balanced out by his humble roots, his oafish demeanor, his southern twang, and strangely eloquent way of talking. Again, all of these are informed by that core of white, hot, black hate, but they are far enough removed that the joke doesn't wear itself out. How Uncle Ruckus reacts to the world and how the world reacts to Uncle Ruckus are both logical, in that people usually respond the way you'd expect them to, but he is obviously so far removed from reality in behavior that you can never quite see the joke coming. His jokes can be loud, his jokes can be quiet, his jokes can come from action, his jokes can come from inaction. Every possible variation and permutation of racist comedy is done and taken as far as it'll go without breaking the suspension of disbelief for the audience, and it just works. Everything about him just works synergistically, and every time you see his abject bigotry juxtaposed with the rest of the show, you really can't help but laugh. So what's it come down to? Honestly, and this is going to sound kind of bad out of context, racism is just funny. Now, that sounds like a blanket statement, but it's not. Racism can be very funny if used in the right way. I think I saw someone make a video about that some time ago, though their name and exact subject matter of the video escape me at this moment. In any case, this brand of comedy is funny due to that absurdity. Ruckus's bigotry is so intense and so colorful that it extends far beyond any prejudice anyone could have received in real life. The sheer cartoonish exaggeration permeates every line out of his mouth, and they just land every single time. The difference between Uncle Ruckus's brand of racist comedy and the ones of the usual bystanders in the show are generally hinged on that level of exaggeration. Some other character saying something immensely hateful can be funny because it was timed well and is true enough, I suppose? To reality, anyway.
Watch where you walking, bitch.
What did you... Wait a minute. I'm white.
Where you going? Don't you ignore me.
Ruckus's jokes are based in reality somewhat, but are exaggerated so far that, while they are technically the same kind of humor, they're basically incomparable. They almost step into the realm of straight surrealism. The Boondocks isn't the most grounded show on television, but Ruckus's dialogue sometimes sounds like it was written by, like, Xavier, and I wouldn't have it any other way. But a joke without a teller is just a thought in the mind of a writer. Who was it who brought Uncle Ruckus to life? This is Gary Anthony Williams, a veteran actor of 3 decades. Williams' performance might be what puts Uncle Ruckus over the top into animated immortality.
Thank you so much for letting us be a part of Dewey's birthday. You enjoying your special day, son?
I expect nothing, and I'm still let down.
It sure is.
Every actor in the Boondocks is excellent. Regina King's powerful dual performances as Huey and Riley, the late great John Witherspoon's immaculate depiction of Granddad, Cedric Yarbrough's flawless portrayal as Tom Dubois as well as Colonel Stinkmeaner, not to mention the rest of the cast filled out with celebrity cameos and some of the best English-speaking voice actors we have. Kevin Michael Richardson, Samuel L. Jackson, Tara Strong, Snoop Dogg, Jill Talley, so on and so on. Also Dante Basco.
I hate fucking Chinese!
Whom I love. So, when I say that in one of the best voice acted shows in the history of Western animation, Uncle Ruckus's performance is the best.
You want my brick? You gonna have to pry it from my cold dead hand, Mr. Obama Hussein.
This is no small feat. Generally speaking, the Boondocks' voice acting skews to the more grounded, earthier side of the cartoonish spectrum. So, right from the get-go, you can tell that Uncle Ruckus grew up in the heart of the American South. This is part of how he speaks isn't exaggerated. Some people just talk like this. However, the exaggeration isn't in the way he talks per se, it's in that gap. There's that word again. Hearing this dialect, this distinctly Black American dialect, saying things that so intensely puts Black Americans down, it's just inherently funny. Basically, everybody in the show has the way they talk and what they're actually saying line up. But Ruckus stands basically in solitude as the lone outlier. But because this is done entirely through what he's saying and not how he's saying it, the sonic profile of the show isn't portrayed by this one black sheep, if you'll pardon my expression. Now, of course, all of that is essentially the philosophy behind the voice acting. Gary Anthony Williams' actual performance is nothing short of perfect. The line between over-exaggeration and underselling a joke is razor thin, but for Uncle Ruckus more than anyone, He can't sound too mean, otherwise the mean-spiritedness of the joke will overshadow the genuine comedic pathos. He can't sound too oafish, otherwise it betrays the pathos of the character as someone who takes himself totally seriously. Fortunately, Williams is so talented, so mesmerizing, so perfect, that he can make it look effortless.
I am a very spiritual person. I start each day by thanking the white man for the sunrise, for the land I walk on, for the air I breathe.
So effortless, in fact, that he's willing to do the performance live, ad-libbing.
If you look around you right now, you'll just see smiling colored folks living the dream, living the life that they've always wanted to live. And because of one man, a man whose heart is as big as his hands, Mr. President Donald Trump, Mr. President.
This is so unbelievably difficult that I'm not even going to attempt to break it down with words because I couldn't even if I tried. You either understand or you don't. The harmony between performer and performance is like an epic symphony that you really should listen to when you get the chance. Though, obviously, the dialogue that Williams can say while on the radio is limited, and his live performance at an NAACP meeting was, well, listen, there's a time and a place to say these kinds of jokes out loud, you know? On that note, I feel like one last thing I haven't really touched on is the actual point of the satire. What does Uncle Ruckus's character say about the nature of prejudice? What does it have to say about the nature of being born into a society that values you less than others? To that, I think it's saying something about conformity. Everybody conforms in some way or somehow to the forces society presses onto them. Sometimes those forces are less than ideal for certain kinds of people, and people choose to conform to it in many different ways. Tom Dubois has conformed to what one could say is the ideal black American.
Tom Dubois was as far from a as a black man could be.
But he is just as much a victim of oppression as Uncle Ruckus, despite his affluence and social status. The way society asks us to conform can make us, it can shake us, it can break us. And sometimes the paradoxical and myopic ways society might view you can cause you to become like Uncle Ruckus. The people you might see on YouTube listed as real-life Uncle Ruckus, while obviously pretty abhorrent, are still victims of tragedy in their own way. They've seen the way the world is, and much like Johnny Swift all those minutes ago, have assumed it to be the world's natural and normal state. Everyone wants to fit in, but obviously it shouldn't be at the cost of others. And like, at least rationally speaking, it shouldn't be at the cost of yourself. You can't wear a boot that's on your neck. And that's the thing with Uncle Ruckus. He shows that no amount of subservience to an oppressive system will ever make you part of that system.
You're just like one of us, Ruckus, but they still hate you. And it's not your attitude, it's because you're black.
And even if you see it directly negatively affect others while you're part of the mob, it'll turn on you the first chance it gets. And the invisible mob controlling your life since you were a child, it never went away. And while the urge to conform as a minority might be strong, gotta remember not to give in to your natural human Ruckusian desires. Fight the power, as it were. Don't make no profit for the man, as it were. There's a lot of animated characters I love. I'm sure there's a lot that you love too. But in the history of history, there's only ever been one Uncle Ruckus. The Boondocks was a show that said incredibly poignant things in strange, unique, beautiful ways.
What is wrong with letting people be happy? Can too much hope possibly be a bad thing?
Hope is irrational.
There are too many instances of that to count. And just as much as he embodies our worst tendencies and the human weakness called ignorance, Uncle Ruckus also embodies the soul of the entire show. He was offbeat, he was strange, and you can probably ignore what is actually going on a deeper level, but he was still a genius piece of writing. And I thank Aaron McGruder, and I thank Gary Anthony Williams, and everyone who worked to bring Uncle Ruckus to life. Everyone who brought the mother loving Ruckus. Brought the mother loving Ruckus. Oh, really should have axed that one.
PAC-MAN.
Thanks, thank you again for watching. This is, it's about 2:05 a.m. on the East Coast as I'm putting the final touches on this on December 23rd. Hopefully you should be seeing this either later today or tomorrow at the worst. Thank you again to AskBlaster69, Megan Omerta, and Mighty Show. If you'd like me to thank you, then all you have to do is, you know. Alright, peace.